For the first time, the UN Security Council has voted in a non-binding agreement for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The United States abstained on a text that contained no condemnation of Hamas. It didn't explicitly link hostage release to a cessation of hostilities, but it didn't veto it. The text says, though, the fighting should stop for the month of Ramadan, which we're of course, about halfway through. Husam Zomlot is head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom and joins me live in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. I wonder what difference, if any, you think this vote at the Security Council is going to have on the ground?
First, on the international order, because the international order has failed thus far for 6 months, and this is at least a step in the right direction for this order to begin reclaiming their own mandate. The Security Council was established by the community of nations after the horrors of the Second World War to do just that, to prevent wars, and it has failed thus far miserably. What we have seen was the unity of the international community today towards an immediate ceasefire after the atrocious, murderous campaign by Israel over the last 6 months or so. And therefore, it's a step in the right direction. And we already heard from the Israeli Prime Minister that he has cancelled a trip by his senior officials to Washington in protest. We already heard that Israel is not going to heed. So the question is, what now? How do we enforce? The issue is not an international law. Now, this resolution has become international law because this is the Security Council.
It's non-binding.
The issue is, no, there's nothing called non-binding.
Well, it's not. There's not a requirement on states to follow what it is that the UN Security Council.
You see, playing with words, Tom, doesn't help.
No, it's just the reality.
You are playing with words. Don't. International law is very clear. The Security Council is the highest organ of the international law. Any UN Security Council resolution is international law and binding, and therefore, why shouldn't it be binding? So, why do you think Israel is so angry at it? Because it knows the consequences should it not follow.
So Israel says that the fighting can stop once the hostages are released. This resolution decouples the release of hostages from a cessation in fighting. They say a cessation of fighting should happen now. Do you believe that Hamas is going to agree to a cessation of fighting without, they say, wanting many of the prisoners that are held in Israel back in Gaza?
I believe ceasefire has to stand on its own and is overdue for 6 months. Israel has not targeted Hamas over these 6 months, and you know the figures, Tom. 100,000 Palestinians now either
When you say Israel hasn't targeted Hamas?
Israel has targeted the Palestinian people. It has made Gaza unlivable. It has turned Gaza into the biggest open-air graveyard, quoting the EU foreign policy chief. And now you're talking about famine officially by UK government, officially, and international institutions. Gaza is in a state of famine. 2.3 million people are starving. So what this has got to do with Hamas? May I ask you? What this has got to do with Hamas? We must stop this.
Hamas is the genocidal authority in Gaza, who Israel say should not and cannot be allowed to have political rule over Gaza and military rule, ability in Gaza, given what happened not just on October the 7th, but before. That's what they say.
Let's talk about before then, Tom. I'm glad you mentioned before the 7th. Good that you mentioned this. What was happening before? I'm sure you've been following that Gaza has been...
before, there were various intifadas, including rockets being fired from Gaza into Israel. The stated aim of Hamas was a genocidal one, that they would happily see Israel wiped out, that they would happily murder all Jews.
Nobody wants to murder anybody.
Well, so that's Hamas.
I've seen one of your interviews with Michael Gove, and you were pressing Mr. Gove if he agrees that Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are occupied territory. Remember that interview?
I do.
So you do consider the Palestinian territory to be militarily occupied, don't you?
UK law says that Palestine is an occupied territory.
It does. So does the international law. So it is occupied territory. Now, in such a situation, do you think the occupier, that is Israel, has the right to self-defense in such situation? I'll tell you what international law says clearly. Occupying powers do not have rights. They have obligations, responsibilities to protect the civilians under the military rule, to provide for them education, health, what have you. And the people under occupation, international law regulates the people under occupation have the right to resist.
But you're not going to deny that Hamas have genocidal aims.
No, what I'm going to deny you here is that stripping this whole thing out of context, starting from the 7th of October, October.
No one's starting from
not
the 7th
saying
of
as
October.
if you know.
I
Tom,
mentioned before.
But as if we just came out of a cave and we didn't know what happened over the last 6 months. Nobody told you, Tom, what happened over the. Does what happened
Mr. Zomlot,
in your
you don't
opinion?
need to insult my or my audience's intelligence by saying we've just stepped out of a cave and no one's seen what's happened since October the 7th.
It doesn't look
Can I
like
ask you
it.
what's
If
happened
you're-
in the West Bank? The Palestinian Prime Minister there resigned last month. He said, quote, "The next stage and its challenges require new governmental and political arrangements that take into account the new reality in the Gaza Strip." Who should govern Gaza once this is all over?
The Palestinian national institutions. That's why we formed a government that will be in charge of the entire Palestinian territory and people and provide for them and protect them and pursue all those who committed war crimes against them and engage in a massive, unprecedented humanitarian and reconstruction efforts.
Do you think that Hamas should form part of that national organisation once this is all over?
This government has been made of technocrats. So this is not a factional or political government. It will not be made of any politicians, or it will not bring any political representation in it. However, this government must have the agreement and the support of all political factions, but it will be purely technocratic.
How would it go about doing that? How would it gain its legitimacy from the various factions, including Hamas, presumably?
Well, there are dialogue and conversations, and there are many of our friends engaged in the region in these conversations. And I think the Palestinian people now want to see the unity of the Palestinian land and the Palestinian polity, the political system.
What stops this new form of government becoming a vehicle through which Hamas exerts its authority and control and genocidal aims?
What do you mean genocidal aims?
Well,
Why are
the commitment of Hamas is to wipe out Israel. It said it would do October the 7th again and again and again.
I'm being very cool here, but why are you using these terms? I mean, okay, so since the 7th of October and the numbers are there, I mean, you know that last week we lost 27 Palestinians because they were starving to death. 24 of them are children. So what do you call that? What's that?
Oh, as the UK government have said, I think there is a famine on the way, isn't there? If not one already in place.
What's that? Is that genocidal?
Well, you know what the
is
court
Israel
has
committing
said,
genocide?
that there is a plausible argument for genocide. Yeah.
A plausible argument for genocide. So I'm saying this just so we use terminology very carefully here. This is a people struggle that has lasted for a long time, long before Hamas, and it will continue long after Hamas, until the Palestinian people achieve their very
Why would it
legitimate
continue long
rights.
after
This is about
Hamas?
rights. You see, Tom, and with your good intentions, we have confused audiences and listeners for a long time. We have been gaslighting everybody, and we have been distracting, throwing this idea here and there, like Palestinian government. The issue is not the Palestinian government. The issue is that can we create the enabling environment for the Palestinian government to actually deliver.
That is my point, sir.
Yeah.
That is my point.
Yeah.
That in order for that environment to be created, you use the phrase after Hamas. There is a time then after. There is going to be a time after Hamas where Hamas as an institution does not exist in any way, shape, or form. This new a body made of technocrats, non-political, come in and run as a unified form the different areas currently of Palestine.
I said the Palestinian people have 100 years of struggle, and we will continue before and after.
After Hamas.
What I'm trying to say here, listen, Hamas is a Palestinian issue. Hamas is part of us, and we will have to find a political system that really represents all the Palestinians, and that we have to come to agreement on our political program.
But can't be Hamas. Just be really clear, that is not going to be Hamas, is it?
This is none of the business of anybody. This is our
respect.
This is our business. It's not your business, Tom, or the US or the UK.
I'm not here representing the UK.
It's the Palestinian people who will decide who will lead them and who will govern them. Our responsibility is to make sure that we represent all the Palestinian people, all of them represent our cause, and make sure that one day very soon, it's the Palestinian people who will choose their leadership.
Absolutely. But you hope one day that this new technocratic body made up since the resignation of the Palestinian Prime Minister in February will gain democratic legitimacy from a vote from the people of Gaza and
It's
the people
not
of the
them.
West Bank?
The Palestinian people have their institutions. the one institution that represents all the Palestinians, inside and outside, inside the homeland and in the diaspora and the exile, and the refugee camps outside, is the PLO. It's not the PA. The Palestine Liberation Organization is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people wherever they are. I stand before you here as a representative of the PLO. Our mission here is the PLO mission, because that is what the UK recognizes, that's what the rest of the world recognizes. It's the PLO that appointed this government. And then we have the State of Palestine, recognized by the absolute majority of the world and has a seat in the UN, by the way. The government of that state is the PLO, and therefore it will be the PLO that will oversee the process of elections. This government is formed to undertake a specific, very specific mandates, requirements. The first is the unity of our people and land, because I believe you me, Netanyahu's strategy for 25 years was divide and rule. You know that. Netanyahu's strategy was to undermine any possibility of a two-state solution. You know that. Netanyahu's agenda has led us to where we are today. Now, our agenda is exactly the opposite. We need to bring life back to the very idea of a state of Palestine. What we want to see short after reaching a ceasefire is a quick, swift movement towards a political vision, horizon, and implementing that vision. Therefore, we have all what it takes in terms of legitimacy and structures to actually go in that direction.
You mentioned Michael Gove. Let me ask you about him just finally. He once described the Oslo Accords as appeasement. What would you say?
Appeasement? The Oslo Accord was a compromise in the part of the Palestinian people and leadership to engage in a process that was supposed to lead to a state of Palestine 5 years since 1993. In 1999, we were supposed to celebrate the fruits of peace. But then in these very years, and then what followed, Israel used the time to actually undermine the very, very idea of a two-state solution, mushrooming phenomena and rocketing numbers of settlers and settlements, and I'm sure you followed the numbers. We started with 125,000 settlers, illegal settlers in the occupied territories. Now we're talking about 750,000.
And only very recently that happened in the West Bank too, largest chunk of land that was taken out. I understand that.
Only last week.
When Michael Gove previously wrote that it was appeasement, what do you say to him now?
Appeasement to who? I don't understand what does he mean by appeasement. It's the way some politicians in the UK and in the West frame this thing that has really contributed to the dismal failure. Any political horizon would have to begin with the fact that the Palestinian people must be treated equally. We have the birthright for self-determination, our right to return to our homes, and we have to engage in a process that would genuinely and finally correct what Michael Gove's predecessor has done to the Palestinian people. That is Lord Balfour, the Balfour Declaration, that cancelled us as a nation and turned us into non-Jewish minorities in these 67 words of his.
Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
Can you imagine, Tom? Can you imagine we, the natives of the land for millennia, Palestine, the birthplace of Christianity, the crossroad of civilizations, the cradle of civilizations. Palestinians were made of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and we will all live together.
Absolutely.
And can you imagine that in such colonial, way, we were cancelled as a nation, and we became defined of and by who we are not?
Well, that is a reflection on colonialism rather than the words of the declaration, which talks about nothing being done that may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. I feel like we could go on, and I would love to have you back if that's okay at some stage. I'm going to leave it there. Good to speak to you. Dr. Husam Zomlot, head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom.